Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm Perry Rarick, your host and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. The purpose of the Trailblazer interview series is to share interesting discussions I have with trailblazing thought leaders. They're innovative and thought-provoking. They courageously challenge the status quo, and they serve as vanguards for positive transformation. Joining me today is Annie Dunleavy. She is a senior vice president and U.S. head of content strategy for Edelman Business Marketing. She specializes in helping B2B brands create and distribute content that furthers their business goals and engages their target audiences in compelling and innovative ways. Today, she's going to speak with us about the 2024 Thought Leadership Impact Study, and I believe it's in its 6th year. Annie will be able to confirm that. And it is based on a body of research that's really hard to get, and it's just incredible. And it's conducted by Edelman in collaboration with LinkedIn. And before we get started, though, I want to talk to you a little bit more, share with you about who Annie is. Before joining Edelman, she led content marketing at B2B agency Gyro. And before that, she led editorial and content strategy for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she launched and managed the Met Blogs Content Hub. And in doing so, she earned the Webby Award for the best cultural blog on the web. She's a graduate of Amherst College and Columbia University. She is a member of the International Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences, and she serves as a judge for both the Webby Awards and the Association of National Advertisers B2B Awards. We're honored to have her with us today on the Trailblazers. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you, Perry. It's a pleasure to be here. So appreciate your having me today.
The Edelman Thought Leadership Study is one that I look forward to seeing each year. It's just full of really actionable information. But I think what makes it distinctive is that it captures the opinions of B2B decision makers and C-suite executives. And that is not exactly a group that wants to share what's on their minds. And they're pretty busy, so they don't have a lot of time to do that. So how do you accomplish that each year?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, Perry, we produce this report in partnership with LinkedIn every year, and we've done that for the past 6 years. And the goal of this research really is to understand how thought leadership influences buying behaviors among C-suite executives and B2B decision makers. And this year, we surveyed about 3,500 decision makers. We did it on the LinkedIn platform, and those 3,500 decision makers and C-suite execs were across 7 countries.
Okay, incredible. It's really an incredible group of folks, hard to get to. And how do you go about doing that without giving away too many secrets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we designed very carefully a survey instrument to make sure that we're getting really the most qualified folks to give their opinions on thought leadership. We wanted to make sure we had people who are responsible for making business decisions at their organizations on one side of things. And we also wanted to speak to people who are responsible for producing thought leadership for their organization so that we could sort of get both sides of the coin and opinions from both sides. And we wanted to make sure we were speaking to senior folks as well. So we made sure to screen for level of seniority. We wanted to understand the industries that these folks were in so we could get a good swath of respondents and really have a very comprehensive, very reliable understanding of how thought leadership drives impact today.
You know, you make that sound so easy. That's much harder than the way you present it, but it's incredible. You do great work, and many of us are very thankful for that. So in this year's findings, what are some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there were 3 key takeaways that I found particularly exciting in this year's report. The first is that thought leadership doesn't just increase brand awareness. It's not just to get people to have heard of you and to think positively about your brand. And of course, it does do both those things. But when done well, thought leadership really is a powerful tool for driving demand for a business's product and services. And I think people may tend to maybe underestimate its ability to do that. But we found in this year's study that 75% of decision makers and C-suite execs said that a piece of thought leadership led them to research a product or service they hadn't previously been considering. When you think about that, that's really enormous. They read a piece of thought leadership content and thought, oh, maybe there's something I need to be looking into. There's something I should be researching more deeply. So that was sort of finding number one that I was particularly interested to see. The second is that thought leadership has a strong influence on sales and pricing. So if you're producing high quality thought leadership content, it actually makes buyers more receptive to outreach from your company, more likely to include you in RFPs, and actually, in some instances, even pay extra to have your expertise so it can help your business command a premium for the products and services that you provide. And then the third piece here is that offense is your best defense. So if you're not producing thought leadership that's showing that your company really has the best insights and is on the forefront of what's going on in the industry, another company probably is. So thought leadership really can help protect your company against competitors trying to poach your customers.
Really valuable takeaways. That's good stuff. The first one, and that I think that's almost addresses a major objective that many executives have in producing thought leadership content, where they does it really make a difference? And so we're going to dig into that a little bit more. We'll dig into each of these. I would like to hear a little bit more about them. So one of the last couple of reports annually, of course, we had COVID in there and post-COVID, but it indicated that decision makers are being more careful with their decision-making process. Maybe they're nervous, they're involving more people, they're taking longer to make the purchasing decision. Any change to that? Have they shortened that process, lengthened it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the main inspiration points for this year's study, and for the topic for this year's report, which was on the impact of thought leadership on engaging out-of-market B2B buyers, was a stat from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for Marketing Science, basically saying that at any given time, 95% of potential buyers aren't actively in the market for goods and services. And that's really interesting because for that sort of out of market 95%, it's not so much that buying cycles have lengthened, it's sort of that the clock hasn't really started. And so thinking about how do you reach and engage that 95% who may not even be in the market or considering a product or service that your company might provide. But for that 5% that is in market and really somewhere in the process of choosing a new solution, we're definitely seeing that there's some lingering economic uncertainty that's continuing to extend sales cycles. So when you think about that 95% that's in market and the 5% that isn't, in that environment, competition for that limited pool of potential buyers really intensifies, and companies kind of need to do everything they can to cast a wider net and find opportunities wherever they can be found. And that's really where thought leadership can provide a competitive edge.
Yeah, thank you. This is a game changer. That sounds so temporary. I mean, we've been talking about this for quite a while. I'm surprised that, we're still alarmed that this takes place. But so something interesting that you said that came out in the report, it said that buyers have a preference for self-directed digital discovery. What does that mean?
I think what a lot of B2B marketers are seeing right now is that buyers don't really want to take a sales call anymore, particularly in the very early stages of research. So what that means is, they're not receptive to sales calls. What are they doing? We're finding that they're doing research online. And in fact, there's a stat from Gartner saying that over 80% of typical B2B decision journey, from researching solutions to ranking options to benchmarking pricing, happens before a buyer ever engages directly with a provider. So what does this mean for marketers? It means that companies' digital content, their online presence, play a more critical role than ever before. What a company has out there on the internet has to kind of do the job and do a little bit more of the heavy lifting that perhaps a sales conversation could have had in the past.
Yeah, that is incredible. 80%. I have seen that Gartner data point as well. You can't help, you have to be in that space to even be considered, I imagine.
Absolutely. If you're not providing information about your company on your website, if it's sort of serving um, as a very high level landing page, you're really not providing the information that your buyers are craving. They want to know what your company is about. They want to see the perspectives from your executives. They probably likely want to see your pricing as well because they want to have all of this information sort of in their arsenal before they get to a sales conversation. And I think for your sales team, when they're in the conversations with buyers, they are better served if buyers have already have some understanding and are predisposed to like that company and want to work with that company. So the more information you can provide, the more likely your sales conversations are going to go well and be less cold than they otherwise might be.
That last point is really valuable. I love the way you say that, that this is a benefit to to the sellers, the solution provider sellers as well.
Definitely. I think it benefits sales teams who are maybe working a little bit further down the funnel, in the mid funnel, lower funnel, trying to convert prospects into leads and ultimately feed their pipeline. But if you're producing thought leadership content higher up at the funnel, that really can produce a halo effect that makes everything you're doing lower down more effective. Because one thing we found in the survey is thought leadership gets B2B decision makers and C-suite executives to think more positively about your organization. And I can't think of a salesperson who wouldn't want to come into a meeting where the person they're speaking to already thinks more highly of their organization and is not just there because they need to be there, but already knows something and is already willing to hear and be receptive to that information.
An obvious plus. Yeah. We're going to take a short break. I'm speaking with Annie Dunleavy of Edelman, and we're talking about the 2024 Thought Leadership Impact Study. And we're going to be right back in a minute. I'm back with Annie Dunleavy of Edelman, and we're talking about the 2024 Thought Leadership Impact Study, an incredible body of research that's done by Edelman in coordination with LinkedIn that talks about the B2B buyer's journey. And they survey B2B decision makers and C-suite executives. Really hard group to get to, and it's just a great body of valuable information. And so, Annie, what you've talked about so far is a kind of a set of conditions. This long buyer's journey, that a little nervousness on the part of decision makers, a lot of due diligence involved. They're doing a lot of research. They're very comfortable in this digital realm. They want to be digitally informed, which benefits them. But interesting enough, you said it also benefits the solution providers because it kind of maybe lowers the fruit a little bit, to use a salesy kind of term. This buyer is a little bit more prepared and ready to speak to a seller. So with all of that, with all of that going on in this environment, what can marketers do? What can the solution providers do about it?
Definitely. I think the key thing is that marketers really need to empathize with their customers and meet them where they are. So we talked about the fact that, according to the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, 95% of buyers at any given time are out of market and 5% are. So if you're continually sending product content to people who maybe aren't in market, maybe they haven't heard of you, maybe they don't even realize there's a problem that a product, that they have a problem that a product could solve. You have to think about how you continue to provide value and nurture buyers so that you're top of mind and that they think positively about you when they are ready to buy. And thought leadership can really be a crucial tool to reach that 95% that's out of market, because you're writing about things that are naturally of interest to them. And the idea is that if you can do that and create content that relates to what they're thinking about, what they're going through, that's what's going to engage them. That's what's going to get them to click on your ad in LinkedIn, read your piece, et cetera, because it dovetails with the things that they're already thinking about.
Yeah, and one of the things that the report says, which I kind of like, it says getting the buyers off the sidelines. I guess that's their comfort zone. So they want to hang out in their comfort zone and in a protected way. And and I know that you guys at Edelman, you spend a lot of time talking about building trust. So I assume that the thought leadership, the way you speak about it, does both of those things.
Definitely. And thought leadership really is a trustworthy way for brands to communicate with their audiences. So, something we found in the study is that about 75% of B2B decision makers and C suite execs find that thought leadership is actually a more trustworthy basis for understanding a company and learning about them than sort of marketing materials and product sheets. So maintaining that trust and developing that trust with your audience, which you can do through thought leadership content, is critically important to the process for sure.
So I don't want to assume that everybody knows or that there's a consistent definition of thought leadership. I think you and I are on the same page, but I want you to talk a little bit about that. There's a great quote in the report, and it's from the chief communications officer at DP World. And what they say is if you know your customers' challenges, you can shape content that sharply identifies those problems and brings your unique solutions into focus. So this is more about the what of thought leadership. So can you go into a little detail about what it is? What is this valuable thought leadership that we're speaking about?
Sure. So, broadly defined, we would say that thought leadership is content that provides a unique perspective on things that are going on in this space. It's content that a brand puts out that's not about the brand. So, not a brand talking about itself or its products or its capabilities, but giving an informed opinion on what's going on outside the company. And so you can have thought leadership or content that a company might call thought leadership that's maybe just providing an overview of trends in the space, or maybe is, they're writing it and they're potentially packing it with keywords to help their website rank more highly in search. And that thought leadership, serves a purpose and is content that can help with a sort of a number of goals and sort of fill the content pipeline. But what we found in this year's survey is that the most effective thought leadership is thought leadership that prompts a buyer to rethink the challenges that he or she is facing. So if you can create content that gets a buyer to consider a challenge they hadn't considered before, or maybe see a business opportunity they may have overlooked. For instance, if there's if there are market forces that are exerting pressure on their business, or maybe an upcoming regulation, depending on what space they're in, if you can get them to see that there might be, business threats or opportunities facing them that they hadn't realized before, that's sort of the first step to getting them to realize, what, I may have a problem or an opportunity that for which I need a solution, and maybe I need new partners to help me do that.
That's very different than what I believe is in the minds of most solution providers who I think their default position is to speak about themselves. So you're not only talking about the customer, but challenge the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe more than challenging the customer, it's more empathizing with the challenges that they're facing. So I think the first step in sort of designing any thought leadership, or really, I would say any content program, is knowing your audience. So before you can create content that empathizes with what they're going through and the challenges and opportunities they're facing, you need to know what those are. So what is keeping them up at night? What forces are they facing? We talked about, what market forces may be exerting pressure on their business that your company can help alleviate. And it's also worth noting too, and looking into, how does your target audience consume information? Where do they do that? Because if you are taking the time to listen to your customers and really doing your research, you can learn what their pain points are. You can learn what they care about. You can figure out what questions they're asking and how they consume that content. And that will enable you to craft content that hits on all of those points and actually present it in the right format, and in the right places where they're most likely to consume it.
Empathy. I think there was a day when nobody spoke about that in sales, and now it's always at the top of the list. So uh, great. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that and putting it into context like that and how to apply it. really, really well. Okay, so the executive suite and the solution providers put a lot of pressure on marketers and sales to measure ROI. We're sending you all this money. We're doing all of this, assuming that they've, accepted thought leadership and they're investing properly in it, which will be another question we'll address. But this has got to be, it's got to be changing the way ROI is measured.
Definitely. I think it absolutely is. And I think thought leadership allows you to stimulate demand where there currently isn't any. So if you're creating thought leadership that taps into the challenges that your buyers are facing, you're actually sort of increasing the percentage of the addressable market that your marketing and sales teams can engage. So in a certain sense, you're sort of widening the top of the funnel to bring more people in and really get your sales teams, more at bats down the line.
So, so that I guess the problem I'm seeing is if only 5% are in the ready to buy state, and that's all you're measuring, that has to be completely broken. I mean, that's not informing you about anything, right?
Definitely. I think what marketers need to do is make sure that they're using the right metrics for the right tactics that they're using and on the right channels, where they're appearing. Because if you are putting out thought leadership content, you're trying to drive awareness, you're trying to shift perception of your company in a positive way. If you're using number of leads and those sort of metrics to measure the effectiveness of your thought leadership, it's going to look like nothing's happening because thought leadership content isn't designed to generate immediate leads. I think it's a little bit of a longer time horizon. So for thought leadership, where you're likely creating the content, housing it on your website, and ideally pushing it out to the people you're trying to reach and influence through, let's say, paid LinkedIn ads, just to give one example, the metrics are going to look pretty different. So first, you want to make sure that you're finding and targeting the right people. So you want to make sure it's getting in front of the right folks, that the right decision makers at your target firms are seeing and engaging with the content. And you want to look at content consumption too. You want to see if those target decision makers read the content. If it's a video, did they watch it? What percentage of the video did they, make it through? Are they spending time on your website? Are they clicking through to other content to learn more after they visit that initial piece of content? And I think qualitative feedback is important here as well. So not just the quantitative pieces, but qualitative. So looking at the quality of the social comments you get if you're posting that thought leadership content organically on your social channels. Who is commenting? Is it a thoughtful response that shows that they understood the piece and got something from it? And you can also even just ask prospects, and this is as low tech as it gets, but ask prospects how they heard about you. And if they say, I saw you appear on a podcast, or I read your article on your blog, that, it showed up in my LinkedIn feed, then you get a good sense that what you're doing is working. And those people may not be a lead tomorrow, but you may be front of mind and, they may think very positively about you when they are ready to make a decision and potentially work with you.
That's brilliant. And thank you for going all the way back. Oftentimes I stop at who's engaged with my content, but you've taken it all the way back to confirm who you're even trying to distribute the content to.
Definitely. I think that's so important because if you have done your audience research and you know that within your target companies, it is this particular role who's making the decisions. You might have multiple people on a decision committee. You might have the person who is making the suggestion to work with a particular vendor or provider. And then you might have people more senior who are sort of the tire kickers to, make sure it's the right decision. And if you aren't reaching exactly those people with those job titles at those organizations, or you don't know who's making the decisions and you're just putting content out there and hoping it finds the right person, there's waste involved there. So the more targeted you can be, and research helps you be as targeted as possible, so you know that you're reaching the right people, that's how you can be sort of the most intentional with your spend and make sure that you're getting your content in front of the people it's likely to influence.
Yeah, and thanks for using social media as an example. I think that's really growing. I mean, we're all on social media, so that's a great example versus a more traditional means. So I'm guessing So the way you describe this world, actually determining how somebody moved through a buyer's process and ended up as a customer is easy to do. But let's say I don't only pay attention. Let's say I'm only paying attention to the sale. I think the way you're describing it is I could go backwards and figure out when did this person first engage, and right? I could just do an investigation, right? For lack of another term.
You definitely could. And I think if you think about measurement holistically, you'll be able to get that view. So one thing that I would advise marketers to do is not have one set of KPIs for your marketing team and one set of KPIs for your sales team. And while you might have different KPIs for different pieces in the funnel, like, places in the funnel, like we've talked about, getting marketing and sales to realize that what's going on at the top of the funnel drives and is hugely important to what's going on lower down in the funnel, because it's creating positive perception. It's getting people into the funnel and creating demand, so that it can be captured. That demand can be captured further down in the funnel. Making sure that you're thinking about that full process holistically is just going to benefit the organization and make what everybody's doing from marketing to sales, and so on and so forth, just make their work reinforce each other and ultimately be more effective.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really exciting. It's an exciting space to be in, frankly, with everything that you're describing. So your first big takeaway, Annie, was really got my attention, which, it said that essentially found that thought leadership caused people to look more carefully and research and consider solution providers that they may have not otherwise done so. So can you talk a little bit more about that? How thought leadership is tied to business outcomes, more sales?
Absolutely. So something that we found in this year's survey is that 75% of decision makers and C-suite executives said that a piece of thought leadership content that they had read led them to research a product or service they hadn't previously been considering. So that's really interesting, right? Because when we're talking about thought leadership isn't about, if done well, it's not about your organization's products or services. But what you're doing in creating high quality thought leadership is you are showing that your company has the expertise, the understanding of the industry, and the smarts, so that customers trust you. If they can understand that you really are on the forefront and bringing the best insights, they're going to be more likely to work with you and think, these people are the experts. I need to look a little more deeply into potentially working with them and what they offer.
It's all connected. Because you brought trust up again. So, high quality thought leadership about the customer, about the problems they have, it builds trust, causes them to look at you more carefully. It's all connected. It's really something. All right. So here's the big bomb. This is also one of the findings in the report. So you and I are both on board. I'm convinced. I love thought leadership content. I see the value of it, as you do. Yet the report indicates that there's a large number of people who still are under resourcing this effort. They misuse it, misapply it. So any thoughts as to why that still is?
Definitely. I think something that was really interesting that we found in the research is there's sort of a mismatch between the importance that customers place on thought leadership in making business decisions, and the importance that producers of thought leadership put on thought leadership, the importance of that in getting customers to include them in RFPs and so on and so forth. So what we found is that companies that produce thought leadership actually underestimate its importance in driving demand and even RFP invitations. So we found on one side of things that 86% of decision makers said they were more likely to invite companies that produce high quality thought leadership to participate in the RFP process, whereas only 38% of thought leadership producers expected that their organization's thought leadership would get them invited. So I think right there, in that mismatch, you see that, for companies who don't think thought leadership has the ability to impact sales, impact their pipeline, they're probably going to be less likely to invest in it. But really, they should invest in it, because as we've talked about, thought leadership really is so important in driving demand at the top of the funnel. It's so important in providing a halo effect for the activities that sales teams are already engaged with. So I think it's really that perception gap that probably is at least partially responsible for why companies may be under-resourcing the production of their thought leadership.
That's an incredible gap. 86% of the buyers, customers, find value in thought leadership. 38% of the producers, the solution providers.
Definitely, and really specifically that they see value in it, and that it's more likely that they're more likely to issue RFPs to companies that produce high quality thought leadership. So really, that 86% sees a connection between thought leadership and the folks that they're interested in contacting and interested in potentially working with. But on the thought leadership producer side, companies who produce thought leadership and really the B2B marketers charged with putting this content out, maybe they think they're putting it out for other reasons, and they probably think that it's not super useful in driving, consideration and RFP invitations. But in reality, if you ask the buyers, it is.
That's incredible. And of course, I'm always of the belief that the buyers are really control. They have more control over this process. So when we spoke a few days ago, you brought up something really interesting. So you have a very interesting background with art, and what you did at the Metropolitan Art Museum, and I discovered by meeting you, I've discovered that I can actually go to the museum without going to the museum. So I'm very excited about that. But you talked about, so now we're going to get really down into the weeds, but you talked about transitioning from the late medieval period to the Renaissance period. And we tend to think that people influence, I'm going to say it wrong. We think that the current influencers are influencing the future, but you kind of turn that around. Can you share that with me again?
Definitely. And Karen, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. And I feel like we may be the first, and I would love to check this, the first people to equate B2B marketing with the influence of art movements and the dawn of the Renaissance at the end of the medieval period. So thank you for, for bringing that up. I think what we were talking about was the fact that when people think about one art movement moving into another art movement, they think about, one art movement influencing another. But what that does is, in reality, one art movement doesn't have agency. It can't exert influence on other artists. What's actually happening is artists, and in the art metaphor, the artists in that second group, maybe further down the line or, later in time, are looking at that prior group and saying, I'm inspired by this group. What can I take from what that group is doing and implement it in my own work? So really, when, art movements don't exert influence, it's really that second group desiring or finding inspiration in what others have done before them. And I think the relevance to B2B marketing here is that companies may overestimate their ability to influence buyers in the way they want to influence them. Companies may overestimate, the impact of if I just push enough product content to them, eventually they'll be interested. But in reality, and I think particularly if you go back to that 95-5 stat, when you realize that 95% of potential buyers are out of market for a product or service, you realize that it's on them to click on content and engage with content that they actually find interesting and are inspired by. So it's sort of thinking about it in that way puts, as you said, Perry, sort of puts all the importance and all the weight in the buyers. You want to interest them and capture their attention based on what they're interested in and where they are. It's not as easy for you to sort of push, keep pushing the messages that you want to push, just hoping one day to suddenly find them receptive. So
incredibly valuable advice. That was really so important. Prospects, I'm going to call them buyers, but prospects and current customers are going to pull what they want. We just can't berate them with these same, worn out messages all the time and expect to get a better outcome from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has really been great. Is there anything else that you'd want to say about this report?
The last thing I think I would say is what we really tried to do in this year's report, as we always have done, is make sure that it's really actionable for B2B marketers, thinking about how do you do thought leadership? How do you produce it? So there's more in the report that we didn't discuss today about, what should you put in your thought leadership to make sure it's truly impactful? And I guess just to dig into that briefly, one of the things that we found when we asked, B2B decision makers, what are you looking for in thought leadership? Is they wanted to see a few things. They wanted to see, we talked about this, they wanted to see that the thought leadership really spoke to the challenges that they're facing. They wanted to see that the thought leadership provided actionable guidance for them to follow and had case studies so they could see, other customers going through the same thing. Yeah, so there's a lot in there that really, is designed to be very actionable, almost immediately for folks interested in producing thought leadership. So there's more here than we ever could have covered today. A lot of data, a lot of really interesting findings that I encourage folks to take a look at.
Excellent. Okay, so a lot more in the report, and I know we just scratched the surface, but thank you for that. And so where can we find the report?
Definitely. So people can go to edelman.com, the website for our firm, and search Thought Leadership Impact Report, and it should come right up.
Okay. And it's just filled with incredibly valuable information. And as to your point, actionable information. It's very easy to read. It's not esoteric. It's very easy to read and apply. So thank you very much. I've been speaking with Annie Dunleavy. She is a senior vice president and U.S. head of content strategy for Edelman Business Marketing. She's been speaking to us about the 2024 Edelman Thought Leadership Impact Study. I encourage you to go to the Edelman website, get a copy of that report. I think it's one of the most important reports of the year. I look at it every year, and even all 6 of them, you can see the trends. So, Annie, thank you very much for your time today and joining us. And I hope we can have you back and we can talk a little bit more about the details of what makes good thought leadership content.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, Perry, thank you so much for having me today. This was fantastic and would definitely be happy to come back and speak about it more.